One change is that we don't have Lynn, the last person that was supposed to close the event. So I'm going to ask you to just summarize the event, like 5 minutes, like the big takeaways. If there are questions, so I'll be monitoring the chat. If there are any questions that I see, I'll jump in if necessary. Okay, so I'll support you, but I'll let you run the show, just like as a backup if something happens. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, and thank you for helping us with this. Thank you, everyone. Actually, so Christian, are you there? Not yet. One second. He's testing me.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम बेला, आप कैसी हैं? ऑर्डर अभी हम सेट कर लेते हैं. अस्सलाम वालेकुम मैडम, कैसी हैं आप? Nice to see you after a long time. Dr. Andrabi.
As always,
great to see you.
Becoming to look more and more like a guru, man.
Maulvi Guru.
Trying to fill big shoes here, Dr. Andrabi.
No, wonderful to see you, Musharraf, as always.
We will be live soon, so please remember to mute. It's very important, otherwise we get echoes. Remember that you have 10 minutes each, and then Musharraf will do. So I'll introduce. So I'll start first. Huma, I will wait for your go ahead, okay?
So Juan, just make sure that you give me presenter rights when it's my turn. Just remember that. Okay?
Yeah, me too. And let us know the order. Okay.
Actually, Juan, can you please tell everybody the order here, and then our event management company will make sure to give you the presentation.
Could you say, I'll do that. Can you please send the link to Christian? He's asking me and calling me right now. So the order is Juan Baron, the second one, Melinda, then goes to Musharraf, then goes to Christian, who is not connected. So if for some reason Christian is not there, we'll jump. Then we have Dr. Kuratulain. Then we'll have Mr. Imran Sikandar Baloch. Then we have Dr. Baela. Then we have Dr. Tahir Andrabi. And then questions and answers. And then Musharraf will close with a few big takeaways. Okay?
Yeah.
Make sure we don't.
Yeah, I've just typed.
There's time in the end. Huh?
Yeah, I will. And
make sure that we have question and answer time, so that's good. Huh?
Absolutely. And what I'll also do is I will, with everyone's permission, I will interject occasionally, just because we want to keep people engaged, and you know, some of you should feel reasonably provoked as well. I'll have no trouble provoking Dr. Andrabi. The rest, I'm going to have to work harder. I think Christian has joined us as well. If he says something, unmutes and says something, it'll be great. And if he turns on video, that'll be even better.
Okay. So search for Messenger. Webex at Webex. Okay.
Can hear you now, Christian.
Thank you for your interest. I have one from Trishna Thapa, but I don't think this is the one. No, I don't have it. This. Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
And we can hear you, and if you turn on your video, we might be able to see you too.
Christian, are you there?
Juan, we just spoke to him. He has the link. He's joining.
We could, while you were talking to him, we could hear you both talking. Christian, could you try the sound, please? If you're there. I don't see him anymore.
Have fun. I can see that he's connected. And
Yeah.
it's popping
So
up on my
antes,
screen also.
Hello.
Christian, we can hear you now.
You can hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Fun, you can kick off in about 2 minutes. Exactly at 5.
You hear me well, Juan, right? For some reason, I cannot start my video, but I will try to work on that.
Yes, we can hear you. And please, Mirador, be ready. So Mirador has your presentation, Christian. So they will move it. Okay. So Mirador, please be ready to show Christian's presentation. Thank you. Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone. We are very happy to have to start the 4th Pakistan Development Policy Series 2021. My name is Juan Baron. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank. Today we have a very interesting set of panelists to discuss how to fight poverty by getting girls and boys to learn. So welcome, and I want to introduce Melinda Good, who is our operations manager in the Pakistan country office. Melinda, over to you.
Thanks, Juan, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. As Juan said, I'd like to welcome you all to this 4th Development Policy Series. This is also the virtual version of our 3rd Human Capital Summit. And it's a real honor for me to be opening today because last year I closed the 2nd Human Capital Summit. And that time we launched this idea of girls learn, women earn, making one of the connections between how children learn and their productivity and ability to participate in and contribute to the growth of the economy and the country and its ideas. So this year, and for this panel, as Juan said, we have a great title. It's called Fighting Poverty by Getting Girls and Boys to Learn. And I know our panelists are fighters for this. I've had the honor of meeting most of them, and it's a really great group of people who are based here in Pakistan and abroad. Now, one thing to notice, this title is Girls and Boys. We're not saying children, and that's to emphasize that while there is big challenge for learning for all children here in Pakistan, we are emphasizing that girls face additional and special challenges. Now, this getting girls and boys to learn is both a global and a local problem, and that's why we have practitioners from across the globe. A few numbers, since we're talking about learning. Globally, there are 258 million children out of school. It's a huge number. 53% of kids worldwide are not able to read a text that's age appropriate by the time they're at age 10, which is when most of us are graduating from primary school. This is what we call learning poverty in the World Bank. Lots of others use this term, and there are similar terms. 53%. Now, when we look at Pakistan, that number is 75%. That means 3 out of 4 kids here in Pakistan are similarly not able to read that functional text. And as Juan reminds us here in the bank, that means as we're driving home, you look around and you look at the kids on the street and you think 3 out of 4 of them are really not getting the opportunity that they should have and that they need to have for the country to grow and take advantage of the opportunities and contribute to the economy. Now, that 75% number also helps, is one of the reasons, although I think this will be discussed today, why we have 19 million children out of school in Pakistan. 19 million. To put this in perspective, that means there's more kids out of school here in Pakistan than the population of almost 150 countries. So this is a big problem. And it becomes a big problem as we think about it as economists, as policymakers, and as educators. Over the last 2 years, we've talked a lot about this concept of Pakistan at 100 and what Pakistan needs to do now to move towards a 100th anniversary in 2047, where we're a middle-income country. And quite frankly, when you think about having 75% of kids not able to be function with this level of learning poverty, you can see how that becomes a daunting challenge. These kids we're talking about now will be the adults running the show in 26 years. So what do we do about it? Now, as we'll hear from our experts, we know where kids are out of school. We know that children are not starting school on time. We know that girls in rural areas all around the country, in Balochistan, in KP, in northern Sindh, and southern Punjab are less likely to attend school. We know that they drop out in primary, but also when they move towards 6th grade, which is middle school. And we know that while other countries invest nearly 4% of GDP in education, in Pakistan, we're investing only half of that. Now, of course, we're doing this virtually instead of all being together, and that's because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that this has exacerbated these challenges. There's some recent data from a phone survey collected by the bank. I have to look down at this for this one. So it looked at combined simulations of the impact of COVID-19 on education access, and it should suggest that between 1 and 2.5 million additional children are leaving school and may never return due to school closures and the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic on their families. So the problem is growing bigger. As we were discussing in the panel before we started, this means we need bold action. Part of today is about committing what we all can do. It's political commitment, international commitment, all stakeholders to ensure that every child, and particularly girls, have these opportunities. Now, the World Bank is committed to supporting the government of Pakistan and all of the community on this. Globally, we proposed a goal to cut learning poverty in half by 2030. So for Pakistan, that means going from 75% learning poverty to around 38%. So even with this really ambitious agenda, it means a large number of children will still lose this opportunity to reach their potential. But still, we have to start. So what does that mean? It means more schools, better prepared teachers. It means really focusing on having kids being the ones who are the beneficiaries of the education system. And it means a mind shift as we talk about both the education system and this concept of the link to productivity. It means making policy decisions that money spent on education is not an expense, it's an investment in the future. So that's our pledge together today. Let me turn us over now to the experts and to Musharraf, who will run us through the panel. We have a great panel. Musharraf Zaidi needs very little introduction. He's an activist, I have to say, as well as analyst and a senior fellow at Tabadlab. Christian Edo, our practice manager for education in South Asia. Dr. Karait Lane is a social entrepreneur and community organizer. She founded the Institute for Development Studies and Practices in Balochistan. Mr. Imran Sikandar Baloch, Secretary for Planning and Development in Punjab. He's been a leader in this field as well. Dr. Baila, she's the Chief Executive Officer at Idara Talim Oagahi and a Commissioner on the International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity. And finally, Dr. Andrabi, who's Professor of Economics at Pomona. So thank you so much for being here, and Musharraf, over to you.
Thank you, Melinda, and thanks to the World Bank for organizing this. I think it's very timely, and the assembly of this panel is really fantastic. I've had the pleasure of working with and knowing and admiring the entire panel almost my entire career. And I think that the reason that we're talking about 19 million kids out of school instead of 28 million, 27 million is the research that Tahir has done, the hands-on community building that Qurratullain Bakhtiyari has done, the mobilizing, organizing, and sustaining of reform that officers like Imran Sikandar Baloch, I don't know if there really are any officers like him, and you'll hear that when he speaks later. The work that Bela has done throughout, her career and what she's been able to accomplish through the Idara Talim Oagahi, and especially through the ACER reports, which have helped populate our imagination about exactly what's broken and what's not, indicating both progress and failures, both in the private and the public sector. And of course, it's a great pleasure to meet Christian for the first time. And given that we are meeting for the first time, I'm going to hand over to Christian and look forward to sort of him setting the stage for this conversation. I think the point that Melinda made about COVID-19 is especially pertinent. We've seen not only obviously the disruption that COVID-19 has caused, I think that COVID-19 has caused likely a permanent slide back of many of the gains that were achieved over the last decade or so, and especially, my own association with education through the Alif Alan campaign, where I had the pleasure to work with many of these experts, but also many others in the community. I think a lot of things that we achieved, we're going to have to reconstruct and really reimagine in terms of how we're going to deal with the challenges, particularly of girls' education. So without me speaking any further, I'm going to ask Christian to unmute and start speaking. I'll apologize in advance if I interrupt anyone, but I will do that, both to keep the flow of the conversation going, but also to inject questions from the audience. You guys can start sending in questions right away. Obviously, we'll insert them and inject them as appropriate. And of course, looking forward to hearing everyone's views and having a really robust conversation. Christian?
Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be joining the panel. I had the opportunity to be last time in the last summit in Islamabad. So I think this topic is very close to my heart. So let me start by saying, if we move to the next slide, for us, girls' education is a human right, and that's something that where we see this perspective. But then also, even though that's true for us, we have found overwhelming evidence to prioritize a girls' education. So there are several arguments in the literature, which have been widely researched, that economic growth is faster when girls learn and also women participate in the labor market. Women's or girls' education rates of return is higher than boys, or overall like 2 percentage points. Girls' education creates empowerment and a lot of social benefits. Educating girls or educated girls are healthier than otherwise, and also when they move to motherhood, they have healthier and better educated children. So there are lots of intergenerational impacts or benefit of this, and educated women protect themselves and their families against shocks in a much better way. So the evidence for making, besides the human right argument, the economic argument of a girls' education is there. Even though that, we see that in Pakistan, there is an unfinished agenda overall for boys and girls, but it is this particularly striking for girls. And then we see here in this slide, we have two, in the previous, please, don't move it yet. In the previous slide, so we have two curves in both graphs. The blue one is for boys, the red one is for girls. And on the left side of your screen, you will see the primary, so children from age 5 to 10, and on the second chart, you will see secondary with children from ages 11 to 16. And one thing that is amazing, is impressive, is that both have increasing enrollment. So both boys and girls are enrolled more in the school over time, but then there is a gap, right? And even in primary schools, girls are 7 percentage points less likely to be enrolled in primary education than boys. And in secondary education, the difference is about 15 percentage points. So this is an unfinished agenda, I think, for Pakistan, and is particularly striking for girls. Next one, please. The next one talk about the learning poverty. And then Melinda has already mentioned the issue of the learning poverty. And this is what we have finding for Pakistan. We see the green bars in the charts are the situation for girls. The pre-COVID, the blue one is post-COVID, is our estimation, and you have separated that for girls, boys, and total. And what you see there is that pretty much learning poverty was not very different for girls and boys, so there is no gender difference there. But what we see is that the overall 75% for Pakistan will increase to 79% just because of COVID, just because of the school closures. And this is something that is contributing to that. Some of these, we see that it's not only poverty, but it's also more out of school children. And today I'm speaking from a country, because it's my home country in Chile, in which the population of the country is 19 million, exactly the same amount that out of school children in Pakistan. So this is also an important agenda. Next one, please. Next slide. Okay, so here, so what should be the goal? And this has been adopted by a Pakistan government and has been discussed in the previous summit. So what we want to do is that pre-COVID, we have a 75% of learning poverty, which is, as Melinda was indicated, that's 10-year-olds, which cannot understand an age-appropriate text. And that's the reality for Pakistan. And then, so this amount, what we want to do, and the government is committed to, is to halve this by the year 2030. And that is something that we found is doable, and then we will talk about this. But the impact of COVID has made this challenge a little bit higher because of COVID, now the situation has moved to 79. So I think to address this, we need to do, we need to work with the government to do three things. One is to respond effectively to COVID-related learning losses that are occurring at this moment. That's a big challenge, and the government has implemented both at the federal as well as the provincial level several effective plans to deal with this unprecedented event in our society. Second, prioritizing girls' primary school enrollment and retention. As we saw, still the gender gap exists there, and strengthening early grade instruction for girls and boys. So that's the agenda on quality of education. Next one, please. And next one. So how can Pakistan reach that goal? And I think that based on global evidence, we know that this has to be interventions. I'm an economist, so I'm going to say on the supply side, and for this, I mean on the school system, teachers, classrooms, and overall system management, but also on the demand side. And that for that, I mean the families and how we support the families, which is the other action. So in terms of the evidence, we know that many things works, and this agenda really has to be holistic. You cannot have only one intervention that will solve this. You need to solve in different dimensions. And this is an agenda that need to make sure that girls and boys are prepared and motivated to learn when they get to school. So this is an agenda that heavily emphasizes on early childhood education expansion, making sure girls enroll early. As you saw before, there is more likely that girls are out of the schools than boys. So having reaching out to girls for enrollment in early childhood education is a way of ensuring that they will be getting into education. Schools need to be made safer and respond to girls' needs. So that means that perhaps an agenda of increasing the supply, especially in the transition point between 5th and 6th grade, where most of the dropouts are happening. That could be done through public schools or even public-private partnership to expand supply in underdeserved areas. In schools, we need to make them more suitable for girls, and that means an investments in wash facilities, separate bathrooms, and also boundary walls. Within the classroom, we need to make interventions to expand to create a learning space for everybody. So it's an agenda of materials which need to be gender neutral. Also, teachers need to respond to the needs, learning needs of both boys and girls. And that means lots of activities with regard to teachers, and how you deliver that teaching training activity. But most importantly, is a teacher training which is gender neutral. And then we can discuss later what that could be done. But this is important. And also in secondary education, increase the proportion of female teachers as a role model for girls. And of course, interventions at the education system. Next slide. The next slide, we need to address issues that we more or less improving support to families. So this is where we address on the demand side. And here we see lots of activities that can be done at the individual, girls, boys, families, and communities. So for example, we are thinking about informational nudges for behavioral change, specifically, for example, text messages to parents with the objective of targeting girls' education, engaging the community in education of their children. Of course, incentives are important. So Pakistan has a wide experience with these cash transfers or stipends targeted for or with a differential amount for girls. Transportation to and from the school is a key issue that need to be addressed, let's say, in these demand side interventions, and also at the community level, interventions to navigate the social norms that sometimes are impacting on girls' education. And at the education system, of course, this need to be well managed. This is an agenda of data, transparency, financing of the system, examination, how you test children while they're in schools based on competences as opposed to just memorization, and how to communication campaigns to advocacy on girls' education. And the last slide, please. And the last slide, this is an agenda which is very large, and it's not only an agenda for the public sector or for the parents. This is an agenda that need to involve everybody, all the aspects of society, and that means civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, the private sector. So this is an agenda in which need to be addressed in partnership with everybody, and this is the way in which many countries have addressed this in a successful way. Thank you so much.
Juan, Christian, before I let you go and move on to Dr. Quratulain Bakhtiari, can I just leave a challenge with you? And I'm sure we'll have a chance to get back to this as well. But one thing that I found underrepresented in your presentation was the role of technology. A lot of people would say, hey, why is the World Bank still advocating for, mom and pop, infrastructure and brick and mortar classrooms and school buildings when actually, Pakistan can't really afford any of that. And especially World Bank colleagues that work on the fiscal side are going to be, tut-tutting Pakistan for spending too much money. So why doesn't the World Bank just promote, more technology as the solution instead of, 100-year-old technology of the classroom? What would you say to that challenge?
Oh, it is not that technology is the silver bullet here. Technology is a mean to an end and as a facilitator. But many experiences around the world has shown us that when we just emphasize, for example, we provide technological access to children, if at the same time we don't do it within an ecosystem in which teachers are prepared and have the digital competences to guide the children in the usage of technology, and sometimes these need to be at some point prescriptive type of lessons so that teachers know that at some point they need to use the technology or not. So we are not saying no to technology. We are saying no when technology is used as the only intervention. That will not solve the problem. It's part of the solution, but it's not the solution. And so need to be understood this in the whole aspects and in a holistic way. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think that, this is the theme we'll come back to, but that's a great answer, Christian. Thank you for that. I think from the perspective of technology alone, the next speaker, Dr. Kurtulain Bakhtiari, can really add to our understanding of why, for example, we can't have a 5G app as a solution, because 5G or 4G or 3G or even 2G is not necessarily accessible to every child that needs it and every family that needs it. Dr. Bakhtiari, you've done 3 decades of work, especially in Balochistan, but all over the country. Talk to us a little bit, not just about your overall experience, but also specifically what you're learning about the communities that you work with over the last year and a half as they try to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Bakhtiari. Ma'am, you'll need to unmute. There you go.
Yes, I need to unmute. There's not my.
Can hear you now.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a great panel, very exciting, very stimulating. Yes, 1.5 years has been really slowed down, talking about Blues in many ways. And that slowing down gave us a great opportunity of learning in that space. To learn in that space of not doing much, holding back. People have a lot of time to talk and share. So we used that time. We used it. And it was really very, very interesting. The depth of our conversation and the stories that unbinded and unfolded led us to the way communities, the way parents, the way children, especially the adolescent girls, are looking at their lives, their future options, their present situations, and things I would in 4 distinct, I would say, which is poverty. Balochistan has poverty of all kinds. Security, which has recently been escalated. You know where to start from. The trauma that has been created as an outcome of the insecurity and the violence and the tragedies that have taken place across the province. And children and adolescents are the silent observers and sufferers who are really not cared for so much when so much of killings are going on. Who looks after the children? Who cares what is happening to the children? And in case of the girls, the adolescent girls suffer from nutrition, especially when they are entering puberty, and there is no any kind of consideration for that age, either from at home or in school. So these four areas came out, in a very natural way. I won't like sad communities, but it was almost like sitting around fire and talking and sharing unlimited. Very provoking and a good way of communicating and reconnecting in the hustle and bustles when it's no more it's happening and there's sort of peace everywhere due to corona. This led us to really think at the institute that why these things are being unnoticed, because operated 200 schools, girls' schools, back in the 90s, and immediately it treated more than 200,000 girls. And one thing that there's no need of going out and campaigning awareness for girls' education, and please put them in school, and you must put them how good is education for girls. I think that the province has really overcome that stage, which is really commendable. Now, the other thing is there are challenges. Everywhere because of the digital, but it's reaching in very ad hoc manner. It is not reaching. It is not being helping in any way. Of learning, engaging in something meaningful. There are shortcuts which young people you can see are getting it and using it for purpose, camouflaging it as education. Coming to girls, we really worry about girls because it is that 6th grade, where the highest dropout takes place in girls. Two reasons. One is their own health situation, which happens at a certain time in a girl's life. Secondly, is their poor nutrition to cope up with that situation. And third is that it is not really economically seen very beneficial to families to keep on investing or keep on and what and the girl very conveniently opts for it. अब मुझे मैथ्स नहीं पढ़नी है, अब मैं समझ नहीं पाती हूँ. I can't understand science. It's better. I don't. It's good enough. Inner body, inner senses are not coping up with it. I find that schools are the only institutions in the rural areas that should become the center of a reference point for parenting, for understanding, for compassion, for girls, for boys. We create schools, we construct schools, we train teachers, but a very deep compassion that is needed for teenagers, for adolescents, transitioning into different levels or emotional part of their lives. That understanding is totally missing. It's always about teachers, about curriculum, about books, about construction. But we say human capital, investing in human capital, but that capital is not seen properly. It's not really, they don't know capital. And what is the status of that capital? That capital has a story. Each school has a story, each community has a story. And the girls have beautiful stories. Out of those girls who graduated, now we have about more than 300 girls who are now community midwives, from dying. And they're such great role model. It is true, those coming across this knowledge that what is going on in the girl child or adolescent girls in the schools. So that's what learning. We should be grappling because it is not numbers, it is stories.
Thank you, Dr. Bakhtiyari. That I think is a really fantastic sort of summary of your experience, and I think it addresses one of the early questions that's come up. I know that Imran Sikandar Baloch is going to be able to address this question as well, but just to synthesize what you said, Dr. Bakhtiyari, this question of people being frustrated that they're hearing the same conversation over the last 20 years. I think you echoed that with some of the lack of compassion, the elements of mental health and wellness for teenagers, the new kinds of challenges that teenagers have. Certainly, when I was growing up, and when many of the panelists were growing up, we didn't face the kind of challenges that kids face today. Even in well-to-do environments where all of the needs are being fulfilled. So I think in an environment like Balochistan, these issues become even more important. But I do think it's really important to pick out what I think was really it was enlightening, but also refreshing, was your recognition that, for example, the normative challenge in Balochistan. Dr. Bakhtiyari, if you could mute because there's a little bit of disturbance.
Oh, there's no one. I don't know.
Fantastic. Just to recognize, you said that the normative challenge in Balochistan, the idea of needing to convince communities and parents and families that education is a good thing for girls, that's no longer a challenge. Maybe speak a little bit more about that, Dr. Bakhtiyari, and the change that you've seen over the last 20 years. I think that'll do a lot of good, and then we'll move to Imran Sikandar. Dr.
Sure.
Bakhtiyari.
We have been working with families through our graduated midwives in the communities. They said, we came across communities who want to have a school, who have been working on working the government to pursue them to upgrade the girls' primary schools into middle schools, into high schools. That pressure is very much evident in Balochistan. And it's not anymore that somebody has to go from door to door or convince that education for girls is very important. That is there. I mean, schools are full, the classes are full, but the dropout rate is also very high. They come and then they leave. That's the whole problem. Really needs really counseling areas, an area where there's someone to talk to them, an area where things have happened to the children which they cannot talk to anyone, whether it's a boy or a girl, where to go to for that. The school should really be a center of real life education, living education, through which children are going through. Only then the school will become meaningful for the children. Not for the politicians, not for the people like myself, professionals, but the children themselves to go to. They can identify someone in the school, that there's a counselor, there's someone, emotional therapist who can talk to, or maybe not full-time appointed, can take rounds in a school once a week or something. But we need to know more deeper our children, more deeper, because what you have just said, that what they are going through in these times, we never went through that. We never went through those bomb blasts everywhere. We never went through because of certain fate or beliefs you'll be shot dead. And we have not seen many things that these children have seen. But there is no attention on trauma of the children. There is no attention on which really affects the learning. How can you really focus on learning without understanding what has happened to the children? That's all the time I ask that question.
No, it's a question that we need to keep asking, and I'm so happy that you raised that. I think it really enriches the conversation in a way that oftentimes gets missed. Thank you, Dr. Bakhtiyari.
Thank you.
I'll ask you to mute again, and I'll now ask Dr. Imran Sikandar Baloch to share sort of his experience. Imran, also maybe start off with, if you don't mind, start off with some of the work that you did in Bhavalpur when you were in charge of that district. I know you have a full presentation, but I just wanted you to maybe speak a little bit about this change. There's been a sea change in Punjab in particular in terms of girls' enrollment over the last decade. And I think officers like yourself, and again, few that have done as much as you have in that journey, of where there was a substantially bigger divide between girls and boys in middle and high school, and that how that divide has been bridged over the last decade. And then obviously very keen to hear your and watch your presentation as well. Imran Sikandar Baloch.
Thank you very much, Musharraf, for the introduction. In fact, I'll start with the experience in Bahawalpur, where I was posted between 2013 and 16. So what we managed to do was to expand education to girls in the Cholistan desert. And there was a project which was brought under the Punjab Education Foundation. We constructed some 75 new schools, enrolled around 12,000 girls in the system. And the best part of the project was that the teachers were given ownership instead of private entrepreneurs. So the teachers had full rights over the schools also, and they made income out of that, which is something very successful. And that's an experience we are now trying to replicate in the Punjab's own Kohistan area, which are the distant areas. Now coming back to the topic, I'll be talking only about the supply side of the public sector education in Punjab, since it's so huge. And I leave the question of quality to eminent panelists like Bela and Dr. Andrabi, who know about the subject much more than I do. I hope everybody can see the presentation. Yeah, next slide, please.
Yes, it's visible. Thank you. Thank you, Imran.
So right at the very outset, I would want to establish that the government of Pakistan is cognizant about the linkage between poverty and education. And in 2013, we changed the way we measured poverty. We moved from food energy intake to cost of basic need and multi-dimensional poverty index. And both of these indices, they reflect education in it. And provincial governments are also cognizant of the new definitions, and many projects that we have come up recently are based on these two indices. Next. So if we have to look at Pakistan as a middle income country, our education statistics are much below than expected. And within Punjab, the least developed districts, which are primarily the southern and southwestern districts, so their education indicators are much, much below than the least developed countries or the sub-Saharan Africa. So which is a cause of concern, considering that Pakistan is not really a very poor country, it's a middle income country. Next. And next, please. And this is actually manifested in, last slide, please. Last slide, please go back. Yeah. And this is manifested in the data also. So if we look at the PSLM of 13-14, so most of the out-of-school population comes from the first income quintile, and that too the rural female. So a woman in the fifth income quintile coming from the urban area has twice the more chances of coming to a school than a woman in the rural areas from the first income quintile. Next. But the interesting thing is that the poorest of the poor, whenever they reach a school system, which school system do they choose? Which school system do they have access to? So we see that the majority of the poorest of the poor have access only to the public schools. And that is a fact that school education department and the policymakers need to understand, that our interventions are not merely for education. Our interventions are pro-poor also. The poorest of the poor are our clients. So whenever we design any policies, whenever we try to integrate technology in the classroom, we must be cognizant that we are teaching the poorest of the poor, and we must be cognizant about their access to technology also. So if you look at this data, which is the percentage of enrollment in the government schools based on income quintiles. So a woman in the rural area, a girl child in the rural area from the poorest quintile is 5 times more likely to go to a public school than a girl from the 5th quintile in the urban areas. So that's where we need to set the context. Next. So just to give you the quantum of the challenge that the school education department has. So we have around 12 million children studying in the public schools. And this is more than the population of Greece. So we need to mobilize accordingly, and the resources that we require are to this scale. Next. So what we did was that we started looking at the class of 2009, the children who got enrolled in Kutchi in 2009 and followed their journey for the next 10 years. And it's no surprise that only 34% of these students, they survived till grade 10. But what comes as a surprise is that the biggest dropout happened in just the first year of their schooling. So 33% of the children, they got dropout between Kutchi to grade 1, which was a surprise to all of us here. Next. And this dropout, it occurs primarily in the poor districts. It occurs primarily in the southern and southwestern districts. So some of the districts lost up to 55% of enrollment just within 1 year. And the better districts like Attak, they managed to retain at least 77% of the children. Next. So this dropout continues during the primary years also. So the disadvantaged districts, they lost up to 60 to 70% of the students in the next 5 years, while some of the districts managed to retain up to 92%. So this divide is very much focused on the southern districts, which are poor in all indicators. Next. And this dropout is gender specific also. If you look at the table at the right, you see that even within Rajanpur, the dropout of girls in the primary was much more than the boys in the primary section. So this dropout is due to poverty, it is due to excess, it is due to many issues, but it targets the women, the female, more than it does to the boys. Next. And this is another manifestation of the same argument. So we start, the red line that we see is the girls and the green is the boys. So we started with more girls in the system. But by the time they reached grade 5, the dropout was much more high of girls than of boys. And this is primarily due to absence of schools or the distances. Next. And if you look at the diagram on the right side, if a distance from home to a school is more than 1 kilometer, the chances of a girl not enrolling is more than 40% than, say, her brother. And this situation, if you look at Punjab-wide, we still have 28% of our towns which are far from girls' middle schools. Even the primary schools that we have, they have much more distance, they are distant from the high schools. And in the erstwhile union council system that we have, out of 4,500 union councils, 1/3 had no high school, 500 had no elementary schools for the girl, and one union council is a unit of 20,000 plus population. Next. So the situation, as I said earlier, is poor for the girl. There's unavailability of high schools also as compared to the primary schools. So in Chakwal, maybe 600 girls enrolled today in the primary schools will have a high school. But in Muzaffargarh, probably 4,000 girls enrolled in a primary school will have access to just one high school. Next. And the problem is of distance also. So the poor districts, so now if you look at this table, Rajanpur has 2.3 high schools in 1,000 square kilometer area, while Sialkot and Faisalabad have more than 45 girls high schools in 1,000 square kilometers. So this is the problem of access here. Next. So within the schools that we have, things are not perfectly all right. So we still have more than 1,000 schools with just one classroom. We have 11,000 schools with just 2 classrooms, hundreds of schools with just 1 teacher, thousands of schools with just 2 teachers, and the problem is huge. Next. So it's not that the government has not invested. In the last 10 years, we have invested more than 1.7 trillion rupees. The World Bank and the DFID have given programs of more than 1.2 billion US dollars, but the NER has not moved. The enrollment in the public school has not moved. So whatever increased enrollment has occurred, that has happened in the private sector, and we are not supporting private sector through any mean. So they are at their own. Next. And the COVID and the lack of fund situation now, it has actually deteriorated the situation on ground. So our development budget in Punjab is now half of what it was 3 years ago. We started constructing 36,000 classrooms. We could construct only 9,000. We haven't added any teacher positions in the last 2 years. We had a program of giving stipends to the girls in 16 districts, but the program has been suspended for the last 7 quarters. We started a pro-poor program of giving stipends to poor children employed at the brick kilns. But for the last 2 years, because of funds, we have not been able to give them any money. Next. So if I am to summarize and if I am to focus, I would actually start by focusing on the poor rural girl child in the least developed district. And the school education department has that kind of data and it has the capacity, but maybe the capacity needs to increase. They should be able to triangulate the census, the private school, poverty and gender related data. And the most important thing is to give a handout to the private sector. With 10 million enrollment, they are the most badly hit by COVID. Thousands of schools have closed, hundreds and thousands of teachers are without salaries, so government needs to come up with loans for them to build and rebuild. We have to invest on infrastructure. There is no way out of it now. And to access the remaining 26% of the primary NER, we'll have to use the marginal cost approach. So Punjab will have to come up with programs to give stipends to poor communities, to poor children, even in the primary. So we have a couple of successful projects also. For example, the Human Capital Investment Project is a whirlwind project, which is an integrated project and it approaches education from the lens of poverty. So I think future programs will have to cater to keeping the poor in mind. Thank you very much, Musharraf.
Imran, that was a fantastic presentation. Again, I knowing what I know about you, I expected nothing less. But I hope that many members in the audience will have seen the presentation and felt inspired and felt a sense of some modicum of relief that we have officers like yourself that have the experience and the knowledge and the clarity that's required for the kind of change that the country needs in the education sector. I wanted to pick on one data point that you mentioned, and I know that you'll have a lot more to say about it, so I'm picking on it very deliberately. You indicated, I think, in maybe the third last slide, that despite the expenditure that has been made on the public sector, the NER hasn't changed. And I think that might merit a little bit more explanation, because though the NER hasn't changed, as I said earlier, one significant change is the catering to girls at the middle school and high school level in the Punjab. And also that what you've been doing may not necessarily have been about widening the net, but there's certainly been a deepening within the Punjab, which is why the province has advanced in some of the key statistics from a learning perspective. When we go to Bela, we'll have a chance to hear more about that, but I wanted to give you the chance to maybe clarify that point a little bit, or argue, in whatever direction you feel it needs to be argued. Imran?
Right, Musharraf. So I think that the NER needle has moved slightly, but the increase has come from the private sector, not the public sector, because the public sector has not increased its excess capacity in the last 10 years. So there has been a lot of improvement in public funded Punjab education foundations. But the core public schools that we have, the number of schools is static for the last 10 years. The number of children studying in the public school is static. And in many cases, as I said earlier, the poorest have no choice but to go to a public school. So to accommodate the poorest, we'll have to expand on the public sector schools. So there's no option, there's no other option. Or unless we expand the education voucher systems and take it to the rural areas in the south. So till then, we'll have to continue investing in the public sector. And interestingly, the primary sections is where we have good private schools also. But once children reach the elementary and secondary, the private sector, it becomes non-competitive to open a school. So children revert back to the government school. So that's my argument, that the government will have to fund more of infrastructure and more schools in the rural areas.
Dr. Andrabi, I know that you have lots of thoughts on this topic, but I wanted to let Bela speak first, and then we'll come to you. And will ground truth almost everything that we're talking about through your own research. Bela, your work, I think one of the questions that we have, I wanted to frame your presentation and your conversation in light of one of the questions that's come from Nasir Kazmi. He says working on the demand side was an important point. Working with parents, families, their influencers, and wider society. Sustainable interventions, particularly for the remote and marginalized communities, would need to complement the supply side. Few people, in fact, I would say nobody in Pakistan has done the kind of work at scale that you have, Bela, on the demand side. And it's not just one area, it's multiple areas, including, for example, the collection of data and the way in which you've run the ACER data exercise over the last decade and a half. Bela, I'll ask you to turn on your video and turn on your mic and take the floor and walk us through your presentation. Bela Raza Jamil.
Thank you very much, Musharraf and the World Bank for organizing this panel. It is indeed a learning experience for me to be here. I'm going to share my presentation and address the pivoting question that Musharraf asked me and see if we can come to that. Let me just start the presentation rolling. And, already so much has proceeded. And so I'll try to move fast and stop on some slides to share it. Of course, I'm trying to make a case for education by gender, income, and quality in Pakistan, and really end it, what are we waiting for? And a lot of that has been informed by excellent work that has been going on with policy frameworks of the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training, the World Bank work that has been going on, and especially the panel on which Andrabi is also there, the Global Education Advisory Panel, bringing the best champions on education, the Generation Unlimited work, Malala's champion work, and of course the Ungai and FCDO supported Siani Saheli documentation. We all know this and it has been said a lot, so I don't want to waste too much time on that. But just again, to underscore, the issue is not between only the richest and the poorest girls and boys and the quintiles, but within the poorest, there's a 20% difference of enrollment in the poorest income groups between girls and boys. And really, it's a learning poverty, but when you look at minimum proficiency levels, even at the end of primary, 65% are not there. So, there we stand, and of course, the gender gaps are there when it comes to issues of, again, basic levels of learning at grade 2, in Urdu, Sindhi, Pashto, in English, and arithmetic, the ASA 2019 data, which comes by disaggregated by districts, by provinces, and of course, cumulatively for the country. So the action is pending, and as Imran really beautifully pointed out, that we're looking at robust data coming from the government itself, and where under the National Education Policy Framework in 2018 with the new government, the big shout out was for out of school children as priority number 1 and quality as priority number 3. And the question is, okay, and so we know that these challenges are there if you look at post-primary and the gender divides, and we know that girls are going to be hit more. So what's happening? And we know that the poorest and poorest, and within them the girls are hardest hit. So where is 25A, the article which promises education constitutionally as a fundamental right for 5 to 16 years of age? And I think nothing better than the Generation Unlimited, something that's unfolds soon. But what it is making a case out of is for the 210 million population, when it's brought this data out, that 60% of population is below 60 years of age. 65.4 million is 10 to 24 years of age, where they want to target. And out of that, 50% is not in school, not in employment, and not in training. And to this, of course, the population bomb with 1.2 million added annually, the case is made for something that needs to be done. And of course, we know that it means that we get further behind when it comes to the SDG 4 agenda and the targets. We're 58% point gap there's a gap in Pakistan when it comes to the target of 100% secondary enrollment. And we also know that the returns to investment in education are, almost for every dollar, it's 7 times. So recently, the issue of inequity is exacerbating during COVID-19. So much has been done on that, but I'm just picking up on the Malala Champions Network, the young people who've been working on this, their 1,600 households surveyed, and basically saying, okay, even prior to 19, there was an education emergency, the large gender disparities, the harmful gender norms, looking at low investments of federal and provincial governments, and the quality of education. But the key findings say again and again, and this comes out in so many researches worldwide on COVID-19, so not surprising for Pakistan, that there's further economic stress on poorer households. And as Kurat said, the poverty is as it increases, and girls really from more marginalized communities get poorer, and the households are, they're least optimistic about returning to schools. And again, going to Kurat's point that this is a time of reflection, what's happening? People are pulling out, and we know that school closures are leading to compromised learning. And even though, Musharraf's your point on EdTech and so on, so although converting 20%, so the report says that 20% of girls and boys could spend time on teleschool or other forms of television education, but even 20% really means a lot in terms of millions for Pakistan, but still it is low, on the low side. Only 3% on education radio, sadly, compared to, say, in Africa or other countries, and 1% could only use the EdTech, the online stories. So the barriers to return to schooling, whether it is financial strains or other commonly cited reasons, there is a real challenge on how we are going to address this exacerbating inequality, and the government provisions to ensure that the 5G, 4G, etc., how will that become affordable and accessible? So, but we need to talk about, okay, some actions do show result. I'm just picking up one case, the work that we've been doing on ground on Siani Saheliya. This is looking at girls who've dropped out of schools in the past 1 to 3 years, and we gave them options to look at things like the teaching at the right level and accelerated, basic learning, foundational learning, but with completion of primary and post-primary, together with TVET and livelihoods and EdTech and life skills. The OPERA external evaluation shows that girls who would be otherwise considered as lost causes ended up, 33,000 of them who went through an intensive program from 6 months to 18 months to show that actually they can complete learning and push on to some very exciting work. And this continued during emergency responses. And the idea is this a smart buy? Look at the smiles on their face. So we heard that why girls may not return to school, including, of course, both the demand side and, of course, the challenges of COVID, but also the supply side issues. But, okay, so alarm bells are ringing, but what about the partnerships and alliances for girls' education, but girls and boys? And I do want to acknowledge, if we're counting this, the government social protection through education at scale, and really, I want to say hats off to the SAS and the BIS program through Sania Nishtar, that this is looking at the life cycle approach. It's looking at from Nasho-Numa, which is the early years from inception, looking at a holistic approach, as Kurat said, to nutrition, to health, to happiness, to more ready to be in schools, to the Wasila-e-Taaleem, which mercifully is going on and expanding across the country at the primary level. Now there's a Wasila-e-Taaleem primary graduate incentive, but hopefully what Imran said had stopped for post-primary in Punjab just because are we giving it to the rich, are we giving it to the poor? So let's just stop it, which was rather sad. Because Bangladesh has shown differently. But there is a serious conversation the next 3 months to start the Wasila-e-Taaleem secondary. And I do want to say that the Wasila-e-Taaleem primary, from just being 250 rupees per month, has gone up to about 700 rupees per month for girls, and I think about 500 for boys. But this is music to my ears that we'll say post-primary wasila talim, the cash transfers and conditional cash transfers, but also the undergrad scholarships which are already on. And for every program, because we recently had a discussion, a webinar on girls' education for Women's Day, and Sania affirmed with data that everything was being targeted for 55 to 60% for girls. So the government financing for education is in a big stuck. And I really don't understand, with all the wonderful people who are there, what is the issue? However, compared to that, the civil society networks, right from IDSP to ITA to, all the other organizations, IRC, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, you name it, they are wonderful work that is being undertaken to show what works, the Malala Champions Network, etc. But so they are there. Are they only islands or oases? Industry definitely needs to do much more. And the COVID-19 donor support has been extraordinary, because they're not just drawing upon their knowledge of Pakistan, but also what is global best practice. And there is a coming together of tribes, so to say, for education. And we have the federal to provincial support programs from the donors, as well as the provincial ones. From the World Bank's Aspire program to GP's Response and Recovery and Resilience, to FCDO's Girls' Education Sector Support, and all the other donors, EU, ADB, UNICEF, UNESCO, JICA, and of course the Generation Unlimited we are all waiting for. So this has to be a grand alliance and can be done so that we can scale up what works, which is backed by government investment, has to go up from 2% to 4%. We have to look at how to mitigate the economic effects of COVID, but also to look at what were the amazing turnarounds during this period. What really is a message of hope in this very bleak pandemic, in this great disruption? Can we rebuild the education system with gender at the center, as Imran also said? And of course, the influencers and key actors are great, but ultimately it's federal and provincial levels that must take the lead. And just to say, there's lots over there you can have a look at, but for every, for a 485 billion spent, if it leads 55 billion spent, it leads to 485 billion returns on investment, where girls' return of investment is 19% versus 12% for boys, and with improved learning outcomes. And the clustered symbiotic relinkages of education, the SDG 4 to the multiple SDGs, let's just do it. Let's just do it. And, look at girls, especially as the great multipliers, because they are in themselves, when you support them, they're individuals transforming themselves but never alone for themselves, for the society, for the happiness of everyone, and for nation's commitment, hopefully, to 25A and SDGs 2030. And, these are the kind of things that we are beginning to see, the closing of the gap between the home and the school, the families finding that they want to invest much more in this area, and thinking, okay, this is not only Sarkar's work, the state's role. They're beginning to see the demand side is also beginning to see a much more active role than earlier. I'll just stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bela. That was, as always, thorough and also uplifting and not negative at all, which so many of these conversations tend to be. So I really appreciate and thank you for always bringing out, what I think we have to be hopeful about and what we can celebrate and build on. If for everything that Bela has done, I think what we know about, especially about learning for girls through LEAPS over the last, now it's going on, I think it's got to be going on 2 decades. Tahir will tell us exactly when LEAPS began and tell us a little bit about that journey. I know, Tahir, you have a presentation that you also want to share, but I cede the floor to you, Dr. Andrabi, and ask you to, as I said, start off maybe with a little bit about the journey of LEAPS itself, because so many of the insights that all of us use and build on are based on LEAPS. Also, Bela, if I could request you to mute yourself, and we'll just go over to Dr. Tahir Andrabi and his presentation. Thanks. And you'll also need to unmute Tahir because I can't hear you.
Okay. Can people see the presentation? Just want to make sure.
Yes, we can. Yep.
So
Please begin.
this is, Musharraf, I'll take your cue on leaps. So one of the things we are doing is, so this will give us a little different flavor from the conversation that is happening, but I think it's still very relevant and can add some insight. And I do have some comments on, what Kurat and Imran said and others. So maybe you can get a chance to talk about that for a second. So this is the leaps long-term follow-up. Okay, so this is the transition, what I would call from schooling to adulthood. And in some ways, our contention is that unless you really understand what happens after school, you really can't work backwards to figure out what to really do in school, what's going on in school, and all of these things. So that linkage kind of has to be made between schooling and adulthood. So in some ways, if you think about our evolution of thinking, and Kurat was right? I mean, in the beginning, when I first started working, some decades ago, on thinking about education, it was all about enrollment and access and girls to be sent to school and the enrollment and NER, and these numbers were very much there. Then as we came to fruition in terms of our first generation, we got the girls into school. Now what do we do? And that was the whole discussion on the learning crisis, which the bank and everybody else has also been talking about. But Pakistan, LEAP started off by testing kids and talking about those, and then Asr came and others, and there's now many more people, not just here, but around the world. And, you were talking about the inability to move NER, the inability to move learning. And Musharraf, this is your point on technology. In the United States, think about how much technological improvement has happened from 1970 to 2020, 50 years, right? Unbelievable change in society and technology. Well, what do you think has happened to test scores? Zip, nothing. So the idea that technological change can lead to systemic change in education is just, the data is really bad on that. I mean, I'll come back to technology. Don't get me started on that. In this COVID, technology has failed very dramatically. And that's because I think partly what Christian said, but what others are saying, the human element is missing. So anyway, we talked about a learning crisis a lot. And as these LEAPS kids, we started LEAPS in 2003, 4, and these girls were in third grade, second grade. And as they have gone through, so we put them in school. Now we say, well, what are they learning in school? Not that they are in school, what do we do about them, right? So that's the whole decade of work on learning. But now the interesting thing is that the cohort that I started my educational career with is now out of school. So these little girls who were like 6 or 7 when we started looking at them are now out of school. They are in their 20s. And so it's a very good time to really think about this transition to adulthood. And what I mean is post-secondary educational attainment. I want to think a lot about labor markets, which is wages and labor force participation. And I have a lot of data on boys and men also, these young men, but I'll focus on girls. So you can just see, right? I mean, this is really where what is interesting. I think we are getting some idea about how to get learning going, but what happens afterwards, I think is the societal challenge. And it's more than the World Bank issue. It's more than policy. It's a societal challenge. Is what do we really think about women's place in this society? And I think that, coming from me, a data hardened economist, to really, I think that getting to this idea that it's a social question that we have to solve, because a lot of discussion is around mobility and women. And then because labor force participation, as I will show you, is very low for women, when we think about education, you think about what are called so-called life events, which is marriage, children, family formation, right? So I think those are some of the things that I want to link education. I want to link quality of education that happened in schools to this thing. Okay. So this is the LEAP sample, 3 districts, rural areas, random sample. So representative in Punjab, North, Middle, and South. So Ranger Khan, Faisalabad, and Attak. First tracked in 2004. And we then went back to them in 2004, 5, 6, and 7. So basically these girls through their primary schooling years up till middle school, then went back to them in 2011, and now in 2018-19. So those girls now are on the average more than 20 years old in the school. There were some who were older. We surveyed all the people in the household. So this has now become one of the richest, longest longitudinal studies anywhere in the world. About half the sample is female. Just wanted to tell you 32% of these people are now married. And I want to remind you of this, that the LEAPS sample was a representative sample of these rural districts. So 5% of the original mothers of these children who we were tracking were completely illiterate. Okay. Key takeaways. Listen, there's a lot of positive that I want to highlight also. Major changes in aspirations, expectations, assets, education, and life events in the span of one generation. But on the bottom hand, I want to really clear on this. The village, we think a lot about the village as a local ecosystem. I think if there is one thing that Asim Khaja Jishnudas in my work is now focusing a lot on, is this idea of an ecosystem. In which there's private schools, there's government schools, there's households, families. We have to think about the ecosystem and how do the actors act in there. And I think that this idea of a village, we use the term, it takes a village. Gandhi said India is a nation of villages. Villages can also be a trap right now. And going out of the village, I mean, this is from LEAP's long term, increases the woman's income. This is just outside the village. It could be in the same district, as a man's income goes up by migrating to Saudi Arabia. Okay, so the village brings a lot of restriction on the availability. Education is good. It delays marriage age, and I'll show you some numbers on it. Delay of marriage age increases labor force participation, though the numbers remain really low for women, and so on. And let me just go on the data right now. Okay, so female change by gender. So it is very true if you look at this graph, especially the one for the male and female. I want you to focus on the positive side, which is the green bar. 31% of the LEAP sample, which is out of these 5,000 girls that we started off with, 31% of these girls have now taken the metric exam. That's a very large number. Now, it is true that more girls drop out in the beginning. So that's a fact also. But by the time you hit metric, with boys and girls, you're getting to very similar numbers. Even in your graph, what you were showing was a downward trend. So you look at by the time you hit grade 10, they're coming pretty close. So I think this is something very interesting, that girls do drop out in the beginning, but then those who stay do stay for longer. So I think that's something to think about. Okay, this is the original LEAPS moms. This is the highest level of education attempted for moms in LEAPS. This is in 2004. So you can see that 75% of them are really at zero education. Now look at this. This is one generation later. Look at this big spike on 12. These are girls, the LEAPS girls, who are now beyond 12th grade. It is now a pretty big number. Now you can see that, right? There are spikes at pretty much zero, less than 5. The girls who drop out, as Imran Sahab was saying, in the primary years, and they do drop out at different levels. But I would like to focus on this part, which is that now we actually are having a pretty large number of girls that are going through the system. So I think that's a pretty interesting positive. And again, when you look at currently enrolled, look at the height of the spike for males and height of the spike for females, more or less exactly the same. Now, in the lower years, it is true that more girls drop out before 5 grade, but once they get past a certain level, so that's what it looks like. You got to push them past a certain level. Then there seems to be a self-enforcing dynamic that comes into play. Okay, employment. This is the big problem. So the problem is not so much the schooling part. I'm thinking about learning. I spent all my life thinking about it. But now look at this number, if you can see it. Currently working. 80% of men in the LEAP sample are now working. These boys were now men. Only 11% of girls who are females now. And with marriage, 56% of the girls are married now, only 32% of the boys. So this idea of marriage and work are very intimate together, and I want to think about that. These are some of the summaries. Let me just show you the graphs. This is very interesting. So this is the earnings data that I was talking about. I don't know if people can see it. So this is of girls who are in the villages and working. Their median salary is like 3,000 a month. This is inside the village. Most of the girls are teachers. So these are like private school teachers in the village. That's pretty much the only opportunity they have in a village. When they go out of the village, it is 8,000. Okay, so that's a dramatic increase in their salaries. And look at when they go out of the district. So this is a girl from a village in Rahimyar Khan goes out of Rahimyar Khan. It's 20,000. It's like 7 times as much in terms of earnings. So I think this restriction of women afterwards is really an issue. For men, it is really the difference is not that much. Men, in the village, they have a lot more choice, and it's mobility. They can work outside the village and still live in the village. Girls don't have that opportunity. They can't live in the village and work outside the village. Only girls who are working outside the village are through some accident. Either the family moved or got married and the husband is okay or something along those lines. So the difference in girls' salaries, so this is out of the country, which is, we tracked, by the way, a lot of work here. We tracked about 500 of these LEAPS people who had gone outside, and we talked to them on cell phones. So a lot of effort went into this. This is something which is very interesting. I mean, this is as economists, look at these two graphs. This is monthly income of women as a function of their education. This is the LEAP sample of the highest level of education completed. Boys, it looks like a very smooth curve. So boys, even with very low education, can make a decent amount of money. And as education level increases, as around the x-axis, incomes increase. But look at girls. This graph is convex, which basically means that up to like age 10, there's virtually no change whether a girl is there. So there seems to be like this threshold for a girl to become functional economically and independent economically. You got to push her beyond 10. That's not the case with boys. But a boy who has dropped out in 5th grade can make some living, not for a girl. So I think this graph, maybe if there's one takeaway you want to take, look at the shapes of these two curves. And this is something that only LEAPS can do. We can link test scores for these girls when they were little to their incomes now. And what you see is the same thing, right? I mean, incomes increase. Look at this graph, upward sloping, as test scores increase. For girls too, in the middle of the distribution, there are some people here. I don't know what's going on with these people here. For girls, labor force participation is a real problem. And so these numbers really drop. We have very few girls. Remember, 11% of girls are only working. So it's not that many. Okay. So this is the wages and 10th grade score. It's a regression. I wish I had time to do it better. But essentially, your income increases for every point increase in your 10th class metric exam score. Your wages for women increase very dramatically. Not so much for boys. For boys, it is negative because boys stay in school. So we still have some LEAPS people in their 20s who are all yet still in school in the university. So it's very interesting for boys as to when they quit. But for girls, it's very clear that educational achievement, educational continuity allows them a lot more ability to be functional in the labor markets and economically functional, as opposed to boys who can drop out early and still be okay, not girls. We need to push girls up. Assets, finally, listen, between, everybody knows streets of Lahore, motorcycles doubled even in the villages between 2011 and 2017. Lots of positives in terms of this generation. Look at television ownerships increased by 10% between 2011 and 2017, but 45% since 2003. So when we first tested them between now, cassette is dead, right? VCR, you can see, so it makes sense. More individual phones, less and less agricultural. The sample in rural areas, it's very interesting of people being pushed off the land. I think that's something to really think about also. Marriage and education. I want you to think about very clearly, highest level of education completed, marriage drops for men. For women in the beginning, it's, this who drop out is interesting, but after that, very clearly marriage age drops. Okay. Marriage age increases as women get more educated in LEAPS. This is probably one of the most positive things that I've seen. I'll show you the next one. Yeah, this is very interesting, right? That, women get engaged, married, and have children younger than men. Women, look at the 4th bullet point. The ideal age for engagement for women, this is what women are saying, is 20 years old, while it is 21 for men. For marriage, the ideal age, you ask women, what is the ideal age for these young women? Many of them are unmarried in their 20s. It's like 22, 23. By the way, what is that number? That's the same number in the United States. So 22, 23 is, after college in the US, the 4-year college. So this idea, okay, women's expectation about how they're going to deal in life really comes in. Education for sure delays marriage. I have a lot of time use data on these women, so I can tell you a lot about what education does to their time also, but I'll stop for that one. This is very interesting. how much say do you expect to have in your engagement? Women, about half of them say they expect a lot of say in their engagement, more so in marriage, but a lot more for boys. So women do think that they will have some say in their marriage. About children, how much say do you expect to have in children? 5, 4, 3, right? 5 and 4 are, very much and much say. So that's about another half. So you have these women in 1 and 2 who think they will have very little say. So this idea of this agency for this internal identity for women, I think that is being developed now in this LEAPS generation. This is the problem. Women are leading lives which are very strongly regulated. So their internal self, so the good part is their internal self is still strong, but look at this, right? 42% of men meet with their friends or family outside their home more than 5 times a week, but only 1 in 5 women. 24% of men cannot move freely by themselves within the village, while 70% of men, this is within the village. 55% of women have to go out with another health member, and so on. So the question is, women are being really curtailed in their ability and mobility. It's not just, across villages, but also within.
Dr. Andrabi, I want to, this is fascinating. We're running up to the end of how much time we have, and there's clearly, sorry, Dr. Andrabi.
I'll stop sharing. No.
Well,
okay.
the thing is, I didn't want to stop you, but just given the time constraint, I just want to draw out a couple of really interesting things that immediately sort of pop out. One of them is, of course, that this is the case. If I'm not mistaken, Faisalabad is one of the districts in which LEAPS has been based, and the other 2 are also within Punjab, and they're not the worst parts of the Punjab. Is that right?
Well, Rahim Khan is in the south. Worst part is Attak is a Barani district. They're all very different. I think the right thing to think is there's only one in central Punjab, right, which is the hub of the economic activity. Rahim Khan is a very interesting district, and Ansab can tell you I've spent a lot of time there. Very far spread out, low density, so they're all different.
Of course. The reason I wanted to suss that out, though, is that certainly whether it's Attak, Rahim Khan, or Faisalabad, generically speaking, these are much better off places. And as a child that's born in these districts, you probably have a better shot at access to a whole bunch of things than you do in most of Balochistan. Quetta would be the only exception. Certainly, even within the south, Rahim Khan is a little bit better off than a place like Rajanpur or Muzaffargarh or even Laya.
Sure.
The point being that these amazing sort of insights that you've generated have implications that are far beyond the scope of education. And I want to quickly sort of summarize this point and then throw it out for any of the panelists to maybe react to or respond to. What Dr. Tahir Andrabi has laid out is also potentially quite revolutionary from a society perspective. The social norms that his research is naturally going to challenge, that set of social norms is defended by a status quo that has power, has the ability to exercise violence outside of the writ of the state, oftentimes where the state is unable to respond or defend the Constitution or ordinary people. So there's elements of social change. There was also fiscal considerations. Bela talked about 4% of GDP. Imran certainly talked about the need to double down on investing in public sector education. And the value of that investment clearly is obvious from the results that Qurratullain talked about and Tahir talked about. But in order to do that, you need to enact a major sort of social, economic, and political consensus where the country is ready for increased taxation, increased debt, or all of the things that would go into that. So education and girls' education is not some small vertical in the corner. It has an implication politically in big ways, and societally and socially. And because of that, it requires us to be able to plug in this conversation into wider conversations. Any sort of final thoughts that each of the speakers have? I want to go in order, in reverse order. So I'll let you start, Tahir. Very quick, sort of 1 minute
So quickly,
summary
let me
and
just
takeaways.
listen. I think this is very true. Pakistan is at a cusp where girls' education cannot be separated from the issue of women. That's what Leaps is telling us now. I'm just following the data. This separation of this issue that the World Bank is now saying, Juan, you wanted me to be controversial. You guys are missing the point. This whole discussion, this bureaucratic discussion of school banane, ye karna, wo karna is all bullshit. The real issue is the status of women in this country is being threatened every single day. And you can see it in the lives of these Leaps girls. I have become a feminist in tracking these Leaps women. I'm moving from learning into their lives. I had to call these people so that they allowed me permission to interview them in Susral when they get married. So there is a battle going on for the soul of this country, which is going to be led by these women. These women are pushing. Their sense of agency is still there. And society is pushing them. You can't let them even get out of the village. So that's, I think, the point. Kurat ka agenda is very important. Violence, I think, is issue. Adolescence is issue. Imran Sahab, I just want to say one last thing on you. We have a very nice paper now where we say okay, investment in the public sector actually creates a floor for learning increases in the private sector. So don't think about vouchers and all that. Public sector is really the bedrock about which the competitiveness of the private sector holds. When the public sector goes down, the private sector goes down. When the public sector goes up, the private sector goes up. This is true in the Leaps villages. So I think that I'll stop there, but that's the point I want to make. This is a social reform issue.
Thank you, Dr. Andrabi. I think that last point I'm overwhelmed and overjoyed with, simply because, you know, my argument with you, Dr. Andrabi, over almost 20 years now is this private versus public. I'm delighted that you acknowledge what I've been saying for so long. I'm just going to get that shot in without you getting a chance to respond. Bela, Bela, 1 minute.
So I mean, I think what Tahir just spoke about was, is music to every one of us. We've been shouting about that as I've made the presentation, that 10 to 24 years is a very important segment to begin to focus on, as is 0 to 8. And that means we will have consistency over time, but also giving more agency to both girls and boys, but particularly women. But the question is that of, it's a political one, and that is, the way we need to mediate this democratic political space that we have. Every time our elections come, we begin to compromise on very important value systems, which will liberate our gendered way of thinking, which is completely, contraindicated when it comes to women and voice and girls and voice, etc. So the question is that how do we begin to see the interplay between a lifelong learning approach where girls and women have more agency, and of course, the kind of compromises we end up making when it comes to political give and take to various groups, in various political groups, particularly the right in Pakistan. I think that's killing us. We need to just, move forward. The Aurat March, I'm all for it, because it's really bringing down all those barriers and those that whole culture of silence just needs to end, and the floodgates need to open. I think I'm all for it.
Thank you, Bela. Imran Sikandar.
Thank you very much. And in fact, I agree to everything that Dr. Andrabi says, but every day I try not to think like a bureaucrat. Some days are good, some not so much, but I agree what you said. I think an important point which Bela mentioned is that 2.5 years into the political government, the education debate has slowly sidelined, and this needs to be brought back to the mainstream. And we haven't heard of 25A and implementation of that in the last couple of years. Even the courts have not talked about that. So, the benefit of having sessions like these and the benefit of the research that we have here is that we can bring and drag the debate back to the political mainstream and, push it. And this should be the major agenda for the next electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran Sikandar Baloch. Kuratulain Bakhtiari. Ma'am, you need to unmute first.
It's not my computer. That's the whole problem. Thank you. It was fascinating hearing and so refreshing for me because I am just very deep, not the country around, but only in Balochistan, have gone much more deeper now, exclusively. What I would really recommend and suggest is that World Bank, government, Balochistan government should focus and on a time frame, like a क्या कहते हैं जहाज की तरह से and on the girls from 6th grade and help them somehow to create a critical mass of getting through the 10th grade. That if that can be designed on a war footing, because you see there are a lot of opportunities in Balochistan for technical education, lot of, but they all matriculate. Now the girls are not matriculate. How do they avail of this? They have to matriculate. To go into any kind of trade, they have to matriculate. But they are not clearing metric. They are dropping out at 6th, 7th grade massively. Somehow, if you could, with all the resources, join and mobilize it to get a critical mass of girls doing matriculate over the next 2-3 years in a massive way, that will really change the scene.
Thank you, Dr. Bakhtiari. I think, lots of really fascinating and important insights in everything that was said. Christian, you had a chance to sort of set the stage. Maybe some reflections from you on what you've heard today.
No, thank you very much. This has been really a fascinating discussions on how girls learn. I think that one of the challenges that perhaps I have here is how to improve girls' access to school and how to ensure they come to school. And then we needed to address in their monetary distance issue, as Secretary Imran was mentioning, but the issue of security in the way to and from and at the schools. Then we need to make sure that when they are in the schools, they learn, right? And that's where I think Dr. Kuratulain has a great point that we need to really understand the children, and understanding the children is important in terms of their mental health, but also meeting the children wherever that she or he is in the learning path, and that's very important. And that talks about different ways of approaching this. Then we were reminded that no one size fits all. Right? Solutions really depend on the constraints. And then I really like the approach of Secretary Imran, going from poor rural girls and least developed districts. I think that focusing on that first will be extremely important, as well not losing sight of other vulnerable groups, like the children with disabilities, for example. And then I really like the point that Dr. Baela was also mentioning very important points on how to structure this. But I also like the way in which Dr. Tahir also put it. It's not only girls learn, it's one half, but also women earn. So perhaps to have a holistic discussion on the two issues together that retrofit into each other, because if women earn, then there will be role models for girls also to see. So these two conversations are really interrelated. So girls learn, women earn. I think it's a terrific holistic way of addressing this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Before I hand it over to Melinda, maybe for kind of an overarching set of takeaways, I just wanted to acknowledge Tariq Khan, Zahid Asghar, Kaisar Jamali from JICA, my dear friend Irfan Ahmadavan. These are some of the questions, Tariq Khan Tareen. These are some of the people that raised questions and helped me shape how I framed each speaker's intro. So grateful for all those questions. I couldn't get to all of them, but I hope we got to enough of them. I found this to be a really fascinating discussion. I'm grateful to the World Bank for giving me the opportunity to participate and partake. in the wisdom and insights that were shared here. Over to you, Melinda. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Musharraf, and thanks to the panel. I mean, for having to do this virtually, the amount of interaction we had, and quite frankly, challenge from each panelist to each other and to all of us, and very specific ideas that I think, we owe each other and all of the participants, as I look at the big list of participants, to really test some of these things out. So thank you for spending the time. Our commitment remains to this girls learn, women earn concept, and putting girls and boys learning at the front of our country partnership framework, a new one that's coming up. I hope when we get together again for what will be the 4th Human Capital Summit next year, we'll have even more evidence coming out of this work. And thank you for the really animated discussion. I was writing down some great quotes from each of you. I know we've run out of time, so I won't go through it. Each of you summarized your own thoughts perfectly. So we can leave it at that. And thank you all for the time today, and remotivating all of us to fight poverty by getting girls and boys to learn. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Juan, did you just want to say a final word before we all checked out?
No, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the education team, to the communication team, and the whole bank, and all the panelists. I just wanted to read like one sentence. That is, the education system struggles to give girls and boys, but particularly girls, the opportunities they deserve. It limits the best version of themselves for their families, their community, their country, and the world. And as Baela said, let's do it. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll be talking many more times.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.